Good evening, everybody.
Kavod Harav, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank you. Okay. Okay, so the tour starts out, it says, Purim mutar be'asiyat melacha, v'makom shenahagu shelo la'asot en osim. So it says, right, that technically speaking, you're allowed to do labor on Purim, right? But it says, in a place where the custom is not to do, you shouldn't do. So what does that mean? Don't go to work, right? That's what it means, right? Don't go to your job. Or other types of, labor in the house, whatever, things which are like, we're not talking about, by the way, driving a car or something like that. We're talking about, labors which are, like physical labor or whatever, things which are, work, basically, right? They shouldn't be working on Purim if their custom is not to work there. So the truth is, that when we lived in Israel, over there, in the religious areas, nobody works on Purim. Nobody goes to work. But here in America, a lot of people do work. That's what I noticed. But the truth is, if you can take the day off on Purim, good idea. Why? Because otherwise you don't have a chance to do all the mitzvot. You don't have. It's going to get very tight with the schedule. There's a lot of mitzvot to do. So you got to make sure you do everything. So that takes time. And if you're going to be working 8 hours or 6 hours, on Purim, how are you going to do all the mitzvot? Right? It's going to be hard for you. So not really such a good idea to work on Purim. But if somebody has to work, there's no prohibition. Let's put it this way, right? At least in a place where the custom is to work. Okay. So then he goes on. So he says, so it says right that if you do labor on Purim, you're not going to see any blessing from that, right? Because it's not really such a blessed endeavor. Let's put it this way, right? So, yeah. By the way, what does it mean that he doesn't see blessing? What blessing do you need? They're paying you, let's say, cash, right? Whatever, or whatever, money to work. So, what blessing do you get from the money? So the answer is, I saw in the one of the books, he says that what it means is that, yeah, it's written in the poskim and the authorities brought down. So it says there that what it means that it's not blessed is that if you take that money, right, and do some kind of investment with it, to make more money, whatever, so it won't be blessed, right? It won't work out. So what does that mean, right? You can spend the money, and you don't need any blessing for that. But to make more money with that money, there's no blessing there. That's what it means. Okay. So let's see the Bet Yosef. So said Bet Yosef regarding the issue of the labor. בפרק כמה the Megillah, in the first paragraph of Megillah, hey עמוד א', עמוד ב', אמרינן דרבי נתן נטיעה בפורים ומטמיעין עליה, right? So he says, right, that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, what he did was he planted, something on Purim, some whatever, some plants or trees, whatever, right? And so they like looked at him like, what happened with you? He came from outer space. In other words, right? They were wondering why he's doing labor on Purim. Te'atani Rabbi Yosef Simcha Mishteh V'Yom Tov. Right, so this rabbi brings the verse in Esther, which says that they were doing simcha and doing a holiday on that day. Simcha melamed, right? So the word simcha, which is rejoicing, it teaches you shasurim besped. They cannot do eulogy on Purim. No eulogies. Mishteh, when it says mishteh, right, which means like a solemn party, melamed shasu b'tanit. That means you cannot fast on Purim. Yom Tov melamed shasu b'asid menacha. And Yom Tov, right, which means like a festival, that means it's not allowed to do labor. So you see, right, the Talmud says that you shouldn't do labor on Purim. So it says, Rabbi bar arbe sarhava bechinata bechamisha asar nata. So he says like this, right? That yeah, well, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, what he did was he didn't plant on the 14th, he did on the 15th, right? So meaning what? That he was doing Purim on the 14th, right? He wasn't living in a walled city, whatever. So he was doing on the 15th, 14th, I'm sorry, and he planted on the 15th. So, apparently that's okay. That's what he's saying, right? So the Gemara asks on that right over there, Umishare, is that allowed? V'hakativ in Megillat Tanit, but it says in Megillat Tanit, Et Yom Arba'a Asar, B'yot Chamisha Asar, Yomei Puri Ainun. So it says over there, right, that the 14th and 15th are both days of Purim. So you shouldn't do eulogy. ואמר לרבא לא נצטרך אלא לעשות את של זה בזה ואת של זה בזה, הנמילה בהספד, בתענית, right? It says that's talking about only eulogy and fasting. אבל מלאכה יום אחד ותו לא. But it says regarding the labor, it's only one day, it's not 2 days, the labor, the prohibition of labor. So Gemara still keeps asking on this, right? Doesn't give up. Oh, wow. Look at this, incredible, right? It says this Rav saw some person, who was planting on Purim, right? Something. And kitna is like flax, right? And he cursed him. He put a curse on the guy. Because he's laboring on Purim. But not samach kitna. So it says that because he cursed him, right? The plant didn't spring up, right? Didn't grow. Hatam bar yomeh hava rabba bere. So he says there that's different. You know why? Because we're talking about on the same day, right? That he's doing Purim, not on the other day. So that's different. Rabba bere. The Rava, this rabbi, Amar afilu tema beyomeh. You can even say, right? It was on the same day of the Purim. That's a different answer, right? So it says they accepted the prohibition of eulogy and fasting, but they didn't accept the prohibition of labor. So he says, right, that the verses bear this out because the second verse somewhere else in the says that they didn't do the prohibition of labor; they only did the prohibition of eulogizing and fasting. So what does that mean? That when they made this enactment, right, the rabbis not to do labor, it seems like the community didn't accept it, right? It wasn't accepted by the community. If you recall, by the way, just in the last few days, I posted from the Rambam, right, regarding this issue. So the Rambam says, right, that any decree which was made on the community, right, and was not accepted by the majority of the community, it's null and void, right? So that's what he's saying, right, that it's null and void because it wasn't accepted by the community. So he goes on, so if that's the case, right, that it wasn't accepted by the community, so then why did Rav curse this guy, right, who was doing planting on Purim? Why did he curse him? So he says, right, the reason why he cursed him is because in that place where Rav lived, the custom was not to do, right? And then he was doing, so he was going against the custom of the community. This is the problem, And this is why Rob cursed him. So you see from there, right, that depends on the custom of the community you live in. If you live in a community which has a custom not to work, so you shouldn't do work there, right? That's the idea. Okay, good. So by the way, this is a general rule, right? In the Torah and Halakha, which is that if you go to a place where the custom is not to do something, you cannot do it in front of them, like, even though the Halakha allows it. Uh, you can't do it. Why? Because it looks, very distressing to these people. It bothers them. That you're doing something against the whole community. This is the problem. So you gotta be careful about that. You have to know your limitations. So what does that mean? If you're doing something right in a place where they don't do it, what you can do is do it like privately. In your house, nobody watching you. But if you're doing it outside, everybody's watching you. And you're doing differently than everybody else. So then you're gonna look like an outcast, right? And then somebody may curse you, like it happened over here. God forbid. So you gotta be careful about that. Okay, good. This is the reason why, by the way, that when people come, from Israel, for the holiday to America, right, to visit, whatever, they have to keep Yom Tov Sheni. They have to keep the second day of Yom Tov. Why? Because even though their custom is not to keep Yom Tov Sheni, but they're coming to a place where they keep it, So if everybody keeps it here and they don't do it, it looks like, very suspicious. So that's the reason why they have to keep the second day as well. That's the idea. Okay, good. So let's go on a little bit. Better the Rabbi, lo nahug, right? Says, but in place of Rabbi Udanasi, there was no custom like that. They by them, or I can tell you right, a different answer. Leolam, leolam nahug, Rabbi not says it really the custom was not to do. The Rabbi neti'ah shel simchanata. So it says Rabbi, what he did was something for joy, right? It wasn't labor. It was a planting of joy. Pasku Arif Rosh. So these two rabbis paskin, the Rif and the Rosh, kirabah, like the paskin Rabbah, the Amar Melacha lo kabilu alayu, that the prohibition of labor was not accepted by the community. So therefore, technically speaking, it's allowed, right, to do it, as we said. V'chen katav also was written Rambam. The Rambam writes it also. Elash katav she'afa piken en rawi la'asot po melacha. So the Rambam also says, right, that even though technically speaking, right, you're allowed to do labor, but not proper to do so, right? So there you go, right? It's not proper to do so. So, if you can stay away from it, try to stay away from it if you can, If you can't, whatever, let's say the boss won't let you off, right? They're going to give you a hard time, whatever. So then you can go, okay, right? But otherwise, try to stay away from doing labor on Purim. That's the advice that they're giving you here. So he says, right, that אמרו חכמים, כל העושים מלאכה ביום הפורים אינו רואה סימן ברכה לעולם. So as we said, right, that if you do labor on Purim, you don't see blessing from that money, as we just mentioned, right? ונראה שכתב כן, מהיו עובדה דרת ידיהו גברא ולא צמח קטני. So he says he learned that from where? From this Gemara, right? We said, right, that Rob cursed this guy, and his plant didn't grow, right? So why didn't it grow? Because he was doing labor on Purim, and he didn't get any blessing. Okay, good. So let's see the Shulchan Aruch here. So it says in Shulchan Aruch, Purim mutar be'asiyat melacha, right? You're allowed to do labor on Purim. U'makom shenhagu lo la'asot en osim. But in place where the custom is not to do, you should not do, right? That's the idea. I've already posted, by the way, regarding the issue of customs. So what did I post? I posted on the issue of living in a place like America where there's different customs, So the question is, which is the custom of America, right? Is it this custom, that custom? So the answer is, according to the Majdam that he writes about this kind of thing, he says that if there are different customs, right, in a certain city, so then people are not obligated to keep the customs because not everybody does it. So, if you have most people in America, they have like a mixed community. Some Ashkenazim, some Sephardim, some Hasidim, right, all kinds of things. So since there isn't one uniform custom, with everybody, so then you're not obligated to keep that custom because, it's not, the custom is only obligation if it's everybody does it. Every community does it. But it's when it's a mixed bag, like smorgasbord. So there you're not obligated to keep any custom like that because those customs are not uniform to everybody. So yeah, that's the right. That's the proper way to look at it. So yeah. So when he says here the Shulchan Aruch, right, that the custom is to do this or that, he's talking about everybody does it. That's what it means. Otherwise, it's not really called something which obligates you. So says the Rama over here, right? So he says now the custom is not to do labor, right? The Rama says, or somebody in the parentheses here, right? But the truth is, today, nowadays, I see in New York, a lot of people are working on Purim. Unfortunately, not really such a good thing. What happens is, right, that because they're working, so they don't really have a chance to hear the Megillah sometimes in the morning. So what do? They come, after work, when it's almost night, and they hear the Megillah the last minute, right, before it gets dark or whatever, right, or something like that. So it's unfortunate when you see things like that. It's not really the proper way of doing things. Okay. Anyway, so it says. Continue Shulchan Aruch. Elaim binyan shel simcha, unless it's right, it's a planting of joy, right, which is allowed. Kegon bet hatanut lebeno o avunaki shel melachim teshareh, right. So he says, right, that there are certain types of labor which are allowed, which are for simcha. So he talks about the issue, as we said, right, of planting, for joy, right? What does that mean, by the way? In the old days, there was a custom like this where, the chatan and kala, right, the bride and groom would get married, they would plant for them, something for joy, it was for joy. It wasn't for just, production or whatever, right, or business. That's allowed. And also he says, right, if they're making abuniki shel melachim, making the orchard of the kings, right, something like that, it's allowed to do that. So I guess that's also considered to be like a mitzvah. I don't know exactly which mitzvah there is regarding this issue. That's interesting. Let's see Mishnah Berurah maybe explains what the mitzvah is regarding this issue. Right. So you know what he says? That the reason why they make this to kings, these orchards, whatever, is that they should be able to go in the shade, right, and sit in the shade. So that makes them feel more comfortable, right? That's the idea. So why is that a mitzvah? Anybody have any ideas? Why is it a mitzvah to make shade for the king? So the truth is, probably the reason is like this, that um, we have a mitzvah, to honor the king, and to follow his instructions, to honor him. So that's why it's a mitzvah, because we're commanded by the Torah. If we have a king, right, over us, especially a Jewish king we're talking about, right, then it's a mitzvah to honor him, and to do things for him, to serve his purposes, to serve his needs. He's allowed to, right, to take people, and make their servants, right, his servants. He has to pay them, by the way. Cannot take them for free. He has to give them a salary, right? Uh, but he's allowed to take people like that, and conscript them, basically conscription, right? For his army, right? For his staff in his house, and all kinds of things. So there is a mitzvah to serve the needs of the king, and therefore it's considered to be a mitzvah matter. Okay, that's the idea. It's always a recurring theme, by the way, in the Torah, that we have to honor the Malchut, the kingdom. You know what I mean? It's always give them honor, whether it's Jewish or not Jewish, doesn't really matter. Honestly, you have to honor every king. And make unless he's like a tremendous anti-Semite, like Hitler, somebody like that. Obviously, you don't want to honor somebody like that. But I'm talking about a normal king. Somebody who's normal. Not a big anti-Semite, right? Or then it's a mitzvah to honor him, to give him the proper honor, to honor the malchut, right? Whatever you want to call it. Okay, good. So let's go on a little bit. It says, right? So it says you're allowed to do any labor which is a mitzvah, right? In general. For instance, right, let's say you want to write some divrei Torah, right? Some halachot. You want to post on Facebook, right? And whatever, right? On YouTube, you want to post, so you can post and write on Purim because it's a mitzvah, to teach Torah. תלמוד תורה כנגד כולם, right? וכן מותר לעשות אפילו מלאכות גמורות לצורך פורים. Also, it says you can do any labor it's for the sake of Purim. So that's why it's not a problem, to drive your car or something like that, because you need it for Purim, right? To drive around, to get your stuff. So there's no prohibition there. The prohibition is when you're doing labor, which is not really for Purim. It's just to make a money, right? That's the objective. Okay, good. Let's go on a little bit. So it says in the Bet Yosef that כתב בשיבול הלקט, it says in this book, אהד יאמין על דלתיה משום דברים מאותרים ואחרים נהגו בהם, איסור. So it's that which we said, right, that Rab cursed this guy because he was doing labor on Purim, because he was doing it in a place where custom is not to do. דאפילו במקום שנהגו לא נהגו אלא ביום מקרא במגילה עצמה. So he says even the custom, if the custom is not to do, it's talking about the day of Purim, right, in the daytime, right, but not at night, he says. דאפילו במקום שנהגו לא נהגו אלא, yeah, אבל לאסור של זה בזה אינו ננהג. But he says, right, that when it comes to, right, not doing labor for 2 days, that's already not a custom, right? So what does that mean? Every community has its own day for the Purim, right? As we said, 14th or 15th. So it's only on that day, not the other day. That's the idea. That's what he's saying. Yeah, there's no Bet Yosef here. I'll read this one. So it says here in Bet Yosef, כתוב באורחות חיים. It says in אורחות חיים, אף אגב דמלאכה לא קיבלו עליו. So it says even though, right, labor was not accepted to do labor, not to do labor, אחר כך נתקבל במנהג. So it says then it was taken as a custom. מן הדין כל העושה מלאכה. So it says, right, if somebody does labor on Purim, we excommunicate him, right? כיוון שפשט איסורו, since the prohibition already spread. So he's talking about his place, not really in every place like that. Paul said, Omnam, it always says, Omnam, binyan shel simcha, kegon bet chatanot levno, avun nikishul menachim, but he says if it's something with mitzvah, as we said, right, you're allowed to do, mutar. The chol melechet mitzvah sharia, it says any labor with mitzvah is allowed. Kegon ketiba shel mitzvah, like, writing for mitzvah, as we said, divrei Torah. מותר לכתוב פסקי הלכות ופשטי המקראות, right? We're allowed to write, halachot, right? All kinds of, and also write biblical stuff. שאדם שמח בהם, the person gets joy from them. Torah is always joy, right? Hopefully it's joy for you, the Torah, right? It shouldn't be a burden. As it says, right? פקודי אדוני ישרים. It says, right, that the commandments of God are straight, and they make the heart rejoice. באגרות של משאלת שלום, במצקת חובותיו, so he says, what about sending a letter to your fellow, right? Just say hello, whatever. He says that's also allowed. And also, right, to make some kind of cheshbonot, right? The calculations, checkbook, right? To balance your checkbook. He says it's allowed to do that, he says. If it doesn't need like a lot of investigation, right? Doesn't need a lot of research. You can just do it easily. But the truth is, that the Shulchan Aruch only allowed those two things, right? Which is, mitzvah matters, right? Not matters like this. So this wasn't brought down in Shulchan Aruch. The last two things that you mentioned here, which is, writing a letter to your friend, or balancing your checkbook, things like this. Okay, so that's the Beit Yosef. Let's go to Shulchan Aruch. So it says Shulchan Aruch, אפילו במקום שנהגו, לא נהגו אלא ביום מקרא, מגילה בלבד. So he says, even in a place where, right, there's a custom to do, it's only the day of the reading of the Megillah, right? Not the other day. אבל לעשות של זה בזה, לא נהג. But the other day, right, we don't say it's a custom. So therefore, right, as we said, right, each community will only do one day, not two, right, of avoiding labor. Okay. So that's pretty simple, straightforward. Let's go on a little bit. So he says here, right, brings a tour that talks about the issue, right, of somebody, lo aleinu, somebody passes away, right, and they have to do a funeral on Purim. So the question is, what's allowed to do, right? So we already said you're not allowed to eulogize on Purim, right? We already mentioned that. Now he talks about another issue, which is that women, he says, "V'nashim manot behem," they can cry out, and during the funerals, there was a custom like this, where the women would like cry out and yell out, scream out, ke'echad, together, right, in unison. U'mitpachot, and also they can clap their hands, right? This was a custom. Until this day, by the way, I see some communities that have this custom. Shemakot kaf al kaf, they clap their hands, but they don't, right, do dirges. That one speaks and the other one's answer. That we don't do because it's very sad when they do that. It's very disturbing. You don't want to get that sad on Purim. But it says once they bury the dead, so they shouldn't do any of these things anymore. That's it, right? It's done. Okay, so it says Bet Yosef, right? Where does this come from? Mishnah Besof Moed Katan. It's at the end of Moed Katan, Kaf Chet Amud Bet. Mishnah there. Veita Hatam. Hatam. It says there, Amar Papa En Moed Bifnei Talmid Chacham. B'chol Sheken Chanukah Purim. So he says, but when it comes to a Talmid Chacham, right, a Torah scholar, you're allowed to do any of these things, right, on Purim for him, right? Eulogizing, and all this, right? Crying out and answering and yelling out and all kinds of stuff like this. Everything is allowed for a Talmid Chacham. But for a regular guy, right, not allowed really to do that, as we said, right? Some things are allowed, some things are not allowed. So he says the Tur brought that down Yordea Siman Taf Aleph. Okay, so that's Gimel. So let's see the Shulchan Aruch here. So we're going to. It says in the Shulchan Aruch like this: Yom Yudal, Yom Tetvav, Asurim be'esped v'metanit. So he says the 14th and 15th of Adar are forbidden when it comes to eulogizing and also fasting. Lechol adam bechol bekom, for everybody. Ben livnei krachim shen osim tetvav bilvad. Only even for the city dwellers, right? What they'll do on the 15th. Ben livnei ayot b'shem osim ba'idad bilvad, or the ones who are dwelling not in the walled city. they're doing only 14th. ואנשים מענות בהם שכולם עונות כאחד מתהפכות מכד שבכף על כף. So as we said, right, when there's a funeral, the women can, cry out together in unison and to clap their hands, אבל לא מקונות, but they shouldn't do dirges. שתהא אחד מדברת וכולן עונות אחריה. What does that mean? That one speaks and the other one's answer, right? נקבע האמת, once the dead was buried, right, לא מענות ולא מקונות. So then they don't do any of these things, right? That's it, they stop. Because after all, it's Purim, Purim is Purim, right? You gotta keep it like Purim. Okay, so now we're going to Daled, right? It says, Katuv b'Shel Tot, right? It's written in Shel Tot, Sheim met lo met bePurim. If somebody dies on Purim, asur le'espido, you're not allowed to eulogize, as we said, right? V'lo nihog avelut, and also don't do avelut. Ve'im met kodem Purim, don't do mourning, right? If he died, Kodem Purim, before Purim, Pagabo Purim, until Purim right, came in. So what happens is that he gets released from that, right? That's what he means to say. Let's see inside the tour here. So it says the tour here. ובהלכות ראש חודש, says in laws of Rosh Chodesh, I already wrote, כתבתי, אם יש לומר בו צידוק הדין וקדיש, right? If you can say these prayers, קדיש and צידוק הדין on Purim, כתוב בשל תות, right? As we said, it says in shel tot. So here he says, right, I'm going to skip over the part we just read. So he says in the end, ואם מת קודם פורים, if you die before Purim, פגע בפורים, Purim comes in, בתוך זין, within 7 days, בטל ממנו גזירת זין. So then it nullifies the 7 days of mourning. ודווקא פורים, אבל חנוכה, right, וראש חודש, אין מבטלים האבלות. But he says, when it comes to Hanukkah and Rosh Chodesh, they don't nullify the mourning. אלא שאין מספידים בהם, but we don't eulogize, he says, in those days either. And the Ram in Rothenburg, but the Ram, right, says that שאין מבטלים אבלות. כתב שאין מבטלים אבלות, it says we don't nullify the mourning, ומכל מקום אין אבלות ונוהג בהם לא בי"ד ולא ט"ו. But he says they don't do abelut on the 14th and 15th. אלא דברים שבצנעה, only things which are in private they do, right? Privately. ולאחר שהתפלל, so publicly you shouldn't do any abelut, any mourning. ולאחר שהתפלל בבית האבל, and after he prays in the mourner's house, בליל פורים, on night of Purim, ילך לבית הכנסת, then you should go to synagogue, right? לשמוע מקרא מגילה, to hear the Megillah reading. וחייב לשלוח מנות. You're also obligated, right, to send as we said, right, the gifts of food. Okay, let's write something else. So let's go to Bet Yosef. So let's go, yeah. Okay. So says Bet Yosef, זה לשון הראש, this language of the ראש, בסוף מועד קטן, ליד מועד קטן, פ"ה עמוד, פ"ה, סימן פ"ה, 85, כתב בספר המקצועות, it says in this book, בהיכא דשכיב לשכבה, right, wherever you have a death in the Purim, אסור למספד, you're not allowed to do eulogizing, ומנהג אבלות בפורים, so don't do also, he says, any mourning on Purim, ויתרבה מילתא אסור, למתא בתניתא, and if something happens, you're not allowed to sit in a fast. You're not allowed to fast. Rabbi Yosef, because Rabbi Yosef said, Megillah, Hey Amud Bet, Simcha, Mishteh, Yom Tov, Ketiv, it says, right, all these things. Rejoicing and, right, party and festival. And Simcha, Mishteh, Melamed, Shasim, Besped, Etani. So those first two things, as we said, they teach that you're not allowed to do eulogizing and fasting. The Yom Tov, what about Yom Tov? The word Yom Tov signifies מלמד שאסורים לעשות מלאכה, they're not allowed to labor, as we said. ומסכינן בהספד בתענית אסור. So the conclusion is, right, that eulogizing and fasting is not allowed on Purim. אבל יום טוב, right, לא, but יום טוב, לא, we didn't accept the issue of the labor, as we said. תתנן, מקום שנהגו לעשות מלאכה בפורים עושים. So it says, right, because in the Mishnah, it says the Mishnah, the place where the custom is to do on Purim, right, labor, they do. Okay. Then he says, if the person died before Purim, right? Purim, and then Purim came in, Begol Shiva in 7 days, So as we said, right, 7 days is nullified, according to this opinion. Just like the festivals. ולגלים מפסיקים ואינם עולים. So he says the festivals do stop, right, the 7 days, but they don't count for the 7 days. My tama, the simcha katibu, because it says, what's the reason why? Because it says simcha, right, which means rejoicing. No, what do you call it, right, no mourning. Purim says, right, you should rejoice on your holiday. Purim nami simcha katibe, and also Purim it says about Purim simcha, which is rejoicing, right? La'asot otam yemei mishteh v'simcha, to make them into days of rejoicing and right, as we said, being merry. לעשות אותם ימי משתה ושמחה, ודווקא פורים, that's only Purim, he says, אבל חנוכה, when it comes to Hanukkah, לא מפסיקה, right, it doesn't stop the אבלות, doesn't, right, ואסור בהספד, you're not to eulogize though, Hanukkah, תתנו רבנן, because the rabbis taught on Shabbat, right, בכ"ה בכסלו, 25th of Kislev, 25th of Kislev, יומי חנוכה, those are the days of Hanukkah, תמניה אינון, right, there are 8 days, דלא למספד בהון, we shouldn't do any eulogizing there, מספד הוא דאסור, אבל אבלות לא. It says eulogizing is forbidden, but not mourning, right? לא מפסיקה, it doesn't stop the mourning. לכן ראשי החודשים, also ראש חודש, לכן מפורש בשאלתות, that's how it's speaking in שאלתות, עד כאן, that's the end of the language of the ראש. והקשה רבנו מאיר, so he says רבנו מאיר, right, had questions on this, כיוון, yeah, so כיוון דסביר ליל בשעה אחת לפני הפורים בטלה ממנו גזירת, so he says since he holds that 1 hour on Purim, right, before Purim, the already, you know, the decree for 7 days has been nullified. But Shiva, Imken, he who adin the Shiva Yamim. So the same thing also applies to the 7 days as well. Before Purim, Batla Mimenu Gezrat Shloshim. That also nullifies the 30 days of mourning, right? Kidima Ota Legamre Regel. Because he equated it totally with the festivals. Imken, if so, keep Lige Behai Pirka. When they're arguing in this parak, right, the Rabban Gamliel Omer, because Rabban Gamliel says, Mishachara Bet HaMikdash, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippurim Regalim. So he says, once the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed, now Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are like festivals. And the Tanaim argue with him about this. Amai lo chashiv nami Purim. Why didn't he also include Purim? Ve'od the Chazinam, the Purim lo chashiv keregalim. And since we see, right, that Purim is not like the festivals. It's not, it says in the Mishnah, Nashim b'moed ha'ma'anot v'lo betapachot. Because when it comes to the holidays, right, the women can, do that, right? They can't clap their hands, but they can do the, right, cry out to unison. Purim ma'anot betapachot. But it says in Purim, they can do both of these things. The Rabbeinu Meir, so the Rabbeinu Meir, right, Paskin, shelo yitabel klal, you shouldn't fast at all, Purim at all. The Yomer Mishteh, because they took on to do, right, rejoicing and, right, merriment, whatever. Right? The Chanukah Purim asurim be'esped. But since Chanukah and Purim, they're not allowed to eulogize about, though, right? The Tanit and also fasting. So even though this book Megillat Tanit was nullified, as we spoke about before, Chanukah Purim no batu, but Chanukah and Purim were not nullified. So it says also, right, that in the Mishnah that on Chanukah and Purim we do these those, right, signs of mourning, like clapping the hands and crying out. Both of them, they don't, but both of them they don't do any right, dirges, right? And the kvar met, if the dead was buried already, they can't do any of these things anymore. When it comes to things which are in private, right? Now, the law that we do mourning privately. The law adif min Shabbat. It's not any better than Shabbat. He says, right? Once after they pray in the house of the mourner, in the evening, so he told him to go to synagogue. בית קריאת המגילה, time of reading Megillah, ואפילו עבודה בקורבן ציבור שדרכי שבת. So it says even right when it comes to doing right communal sacrifices, which pushes aside Shabbat, קריאת המגילה דוחה אותה, and the Megillah pushes that aside, right? The sacrifice. Kol sheken abelut rabbanan. All the more so, right? When it comes to abelut, the morning, which is rabbinical, v'chayav lishluach banot. So, right, you're obligated to send the foods, as we said, right? The abel chayav b'chol mitzvot hamorot b'Torah, because the abel, the mourner, is obligated in all the mitzvot of the Torah. V'yom chamisha asar, on the 15th day, he says, eno mitabel. He doesn't fast. I'm sorry, he doesn't mourn. Midyamin on peg sheni Tanit. It says it's the second pair of Tanit. Yudchet Amud Bet. Yom Yudalet Yom Tetvav Yom Puria. That these 2 days are the days of Purim, 14th and 15th. The Lola Mispat Behon, that we shouldn't eulogize on them. Ve'amar Rabba Lo tznitzach ela le'asor et shel zeh bezeh. So he says we're only talking about here the issue that both days are not allowed, even though you're only doing 1 day for the reading of the Megillah. And even though he doesn't mourn for them, but they do count for him for 7 days. Midi dehava Shabbat, just like Shabbat. And then he finishes his abelut afterwards. That's the end of it. Okay, so let's see where we're going here. Shulchan Aruch. Okay, yeah, we're almost done. So just give me 1 minute here. So it says right that וכן כתב במרדכי, that's what it says also in the מרדכי, פרק כמה דמגילה, first פרק המגילה, ודברים אלו הם שכתב רבנו, so it says these things which were written by רבנו, the Torah, כאן בשם הרב, in the name of the right, Rabbi Meir מרוטנבורג, מקצת ספרי רבנו כתוב הרמב"ם, but in some of the books of the Torah it says Rambam there, right, not Rabbi Meir, במקום שהרב Rabbi Meir מרוטנבורג בטעות סופר הוא. So he said that's a mistake, if they wrote the Rambam. שהרמב"ם סובר, because the Rambam really holds שכל דברי האבלות נוהגים בחנוכה ופורים. That all kinds of right mourning are customary on Hanukkah and Purim. שכך כתב בפירוש בפרק י"א, that's what it says in the second פרק י"א, מהלכות האבלות, knows of האבלות. Okay, we'll do Shulchan Aruch, we'll stop there. Let's see. I went a little bit fast, but it's like already stuff that we covered more or less. So it says the Shulchan Aruch like this, right? Daled. Kol divrei avelut noagim b'Chanukah Purim, right? All kinds of avelut we do on Chanukah and Purim. So the way Paskins is that we do avelut on Chanukah and Purim. Yeah, so this is like a big dispute, as we saw in the Beit Yosef, right? There's different opinions. But the halacha, he Paskins that we do. Mikol makom, yelech lebet HaKnesset lishma Megillah. So it says the Ramah, right? But you should go to the synagogue to hear the Megillah. ואם יוכל לאסוף מניין בביתו לקרוא מגילה עדיף תפק. But as if you can gather a minyan in your house, the mourner, right, we're talking about, and read the Megillah at home, it's even better. ויש אומרים שאין אבלות נוהג בפורים. So he says, some say that אבלות is not customary on Purim, לא בי"ד ובי"ט, not 14th to 15th, וכן נוהגים. So he says, right, the Ashkenazim, the custom is not to do אבלות on Purim. So it seems to be like a difference between the Ashkenazim and Sfaradim. ואפילו אבלות יום ראשון נדחה בפני פורים. So even the first day of אבלות is pushed aside because of Purim. Why do we care so much about the first day? The first day is from the Torah, and even that's pushed aside. All the more so the rest of the days which are from the rabbis. Okay. So he goes on about דברים של tzina, but it says things which are in private though, right? Mourning which is private, no heg. So that you should do, right? That's the way he paskins. Even though he says we don't do mourning on Purim, but it does count for 7 days. For 7 days of mourning, Shabbat, just like Shabbat. That's also true paskins like that. Your day siman tet aleph. Okay, so right to sum it up, right? What's the story here? That according to Maran Shulchan Aruch, we do avelut on Purim, but right. According to Ramah, we only do things which are private, but things which are public, we don't do avelut on Purim, right? Even on the first day, Okay, very good. I guess we'll stop there. Bezat Hashem, we'll see you next week, right? Sunday. Bezat Hashem, Chazak Baruch, be blessed with wealth, health, and happiness, and we should have good tidings, Bezat Hashem. Everything, Bezat Hashem. The hostages maybe will be released. Hopefully, we'll get our people back. You know, these people are suffering. They're being tortured over there. It's horrific. You know what's going on with those hostages. Hashem should help us, you know, to reach all the objectives and right, come out victorious. By Purim time, you know, we should have the total victory. Bezat Hashem. God willing. Amen. Amen. So we'll see you next time. Bezat Hashem. Chazak Baruch. Laila Tov.
Kavod Harav, thank you so much.
All the best.